Reverend Moss Ntlha. Reverend Moss is the General Secretary of the Evangelical Alliance of South Africa. Moss has engaged in public policy and advocacy both in South Africa and internationally. He is a church planter, disciple maker, and activist for justice. Please, let's all welcome Reverend Moss Ntlha.
How does one follow an act like that? John, thanks for your amazing and passionate plea for us to take a listen at the militancy of youth and the confrontational nature that you bring to this challenge that we are facing. Brothers and sisters, I'm delighted to be here with you. It's for us, and I joined my colleagues who were here yesterday, Reverend Frank Chikani and others, who stand amazed at the resilience, at the courage that you represent. And I was just reflecting this morning about how on earth, looking at the scenes that you look at daily, with guns pointed at you every day, and that becomes part of your reality daily. And we watched a documentary the other day, 2 days ago, and it was just so wrenching to watch how a father and a child look at this same scene and how they process these guns pointed at them in a menacing way. And that is not a once-off, that's the reality every day. And just to be able to stand alongside you and to, in some way, be in solidarity with you is a joy and a delight to us. And we do so, in a sense, with a conviction that this wall will fall. When we say this to other people from other parts of the world, they doubt it. But as South Africans, we have been treated by God to the front row seat of watching how apartheid collapses eventually. And we are witnesses of that reality, that apartheid has built within itself the seeds of its own destruction. And so as we see the faith that we see manifest in all of the people that we've met here, especially young people, we know that that's all it takes. There's a text, a lovely text in the Bible that I have loved for many years now. It's in Mark 11, verse 22. It talks about how mountains move. Jesus says, if you have this kind of faith, small, and you say to this mountain, move and go to the sea, fall into the sea, and you do not doubt in your heart it will happen. And I say this as one who has seen a mountain of apartheid go to the sea and disappear. And so it may take a long time. Our struggle is one of the longest on our continent, over 100 years. And if you count other skirmishes with colonialism before then, it can be even much longer. But there never was a doubt that someday it will disappear. And so with action, with courage, with faith, we believe that this struggle will be won, and that God will eventually show himself Lord. Amen? I've been asked to speak on apartheid and the theology of segregation, and I think that the job has been done for me somewhat by what Reverend Francescani did yesterday. So that gives me permission to stray a little bit from that topic. And let me start with the question that this conference is organized around, which is this: am I my brother's keeper? Thank you, Ntlha, for the way that you treated us to that reflection a couple of days ago, and all of the other speakers who've spoken on it. Thanks, Yusuf, for what you did with that question yesterday. I want to come at that question in a different way and say that that question is very typical of a program of self-justification. And the thing with self-justifying theological programs is that they come after you have killed someone. It comes after the act. It comes after you find yourself in a mess and are trying to figure out how to feel better. And so that question was the way Cain was saying that he's asking God the question, am I my brother's keeper? And my sense is that, and Ntlha was saying, and it is true, that at least in this country, it is the case that the wall that was finally built here existed in the minds of people before it was built, which is true. But it is also true to say, it's almost like a chicken and an egg, that what comes first, in our experience in South Africa, and in Africa more broadly, you have colonialism. It takes many forms in different parts of our continent. The Spanish came, the Dutch came, the British, the Germans, the French. All of these people were colonial countries of Europe. And so what they then did in Africa was what they do. And so, in a sense, and this is one of the reasons that the charge of Christian Zionism does not work with us very much in South Africa, at least. Because in a sense, we realize how it is that the same people who supported our own colonization, our own oppression, are the same ones who say that it is okay for Israel to do what it is doing in the Holy Land. It's very difficult to agree with them. When Europe says this Christian Zionism is a legitimate way to look at Scripture, it rings a bell in our memory that they said that about apartheid in our case, and they saw nothing wrong with the suffering of millions of people, and even use Scripture to justify it. So if those people say the same thing, and they justify what is a brutal system here, we almost disagree before we even go any far with listening. And so in a sense, it is because we know that Europe has done all of these things. And so in a sense, if you think about, and I use the names of Lord Balfour because I saw him yesterday evening at the World Hotel, Hold Up Hotel. He was sitting there in the corner. And so before all of these architects of Zionism, Theodore Herzl, it is not possible to conceive of Zionism, of what happened here before you had a European milieu that was well steeped in a culture, in the habit of colonizing people. So Europe was right and ready for that to happen, and with the connivance, assistance, it became possible for Zionism to become what it is today, and supported, as Ntlha helpfully helped us to remember yesterday, that actually Christian Zionism predates Zionism proper, in a sense. And so in that way, my suspicion, let me put it that way, is that for that to happen, you needed a colonial Europe to sanction it. And you needed the US, with the notoriety of what they did in the discovery of the Americas and what they did to Native Americans. You needed people of that cultural context to sponsor this project. So because of that, my affirmation is you first need murder. You need the murdering of millions of people's cultures, millions of people's lives must be destroyed before you actually theologize about it to make yourself feel better. So that's the mutilation I want to do to that question, Ntlha. In a sense, it's my take on it, and I'll tell you why. And in our country, let me move this a bit. In our country, we've seen a lot of this, and I made some generous quotations there just to give you a sense of what apartheid theology or theologians got up to with the scriptures. And this is a very early text in the 1944s. It's a text by theologians of the Dutch Reformed Church at a time when colonialism was well and truly underway in South Africa. It started in the 1600s, but the first time the Afrikaner was ready to take power and perfect what became apartheid from its colonial past, you had this thing happening with Afrikaner theology, and they used creation theology, chapter 1 of Genesis, and chapter 11, all of which say, chapter 1 says that God created all things and separated the darkness from the light, separated the dry land from the waters, separated the animals one after each kind. And that kind of theological reasoning led in the mind of the Afrikaner apologists of apartheid to the fact that God is not only one who creates unity, the beauty of unity, but he does it in a way that divides them. So it is necessary for black and white to separate, be divided, and the separate development. And that's the language that was used for apartheid. It was meant not as a harmful, mischievous, deadly program that it was meant, at least as the way that they framed it, separate development. When you hear that, you get a sense it is separating like that. You don't get it is separating like that. And in that sense, you get to miss the brutality and the oppression of it. And it's very clear, obviously, in this country as well. Outside of this country, people think the two-state solution is a reasonable, fair way of talking about the way forward in this country. And it is because they haven't been here in some ways, or it is because they haven't seen what happens from the other side of the wall. And I'll give you a bit of my own story and my entry into the journey, my journey with Palestinian Christians. My name is not Mos, it is Moses. My father's name is David. What does that tell you? It tells you this, that my family, the heroes of Israel, are the heroes of my family. So we love Israel. And so when we read the story in the Bible, you know, I don't know if there's an evangelical in the world who looks at the Bible and takes any other side than the side of David and the side of Moses, you know. But that's before you come here. And so a few years ago, I was asked by the government to be part of a commission in South Africa after the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, to help our country move beyond the TRC. In other words, you had, in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, you had things said about different people. And the possibility was that there could be more hatred when you now know what happened to your loved ones, the brutality with which they were killed and so on. Reverend Frank didn't tell you this, but one of the things that happened to him was that he was poisoned. Chemical weapons were used upon him and he almost died. And how did that happen? They took his bag as he went into an airplane to travel somewhere and put poison in his clothes. And when he changed clothes were at a point of destination, he just became sick. It just so happened that he was traveling in the US and they found out that it was poisoning. And that was almost after he was dead, because a priest was called to say the last rites because Frank was meant to die. And the confession came at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that the regime did it. And Frank always thought that he was Christian enough to forgive, you know, but when he came face to face with the guy who told him, I did it, you were meant to die. And so the rage came up again, and John, you would understand what he wanted to do with that guy. But then he had to wrestle with the fact that this is post-apartheid. We have to figure out how to provide leadership about what happens next. Now, I say that to say, after that, there was a possibility of alienation between different groups. And I served in a commission on culture, religion, and language to see how these could then be helped to work together so that we build a society that can move away from the apartheid past. On that commission, I served with a Jewish friend because she represents the Jewish community, which is a small percentage of the community, but we are being inclusive. It's a post-apartheid society, and so she invites me to come to Israel. Oh yeah, I'm interested, actually. I hadn't been to this country, so I go here and I find, and I'm blown away by just being able to read the Bible in Bethlehem. Well, in Bethlehem here, it was just in a tourist bus, but you know, we weren't allowed to talk to you guys because you'd kill us and so. But I kept asking the question, what's this with these guns? What's this with these checkpoints? And I was saying to my fellow travelers on this, because there was a whole group of South Africans, I told them, every time I see this scenario, every time I see young people throw stones at military, very heavily armed people, automatically, without asking questions, I side with the young people. That's my own history. That's what I grew up doing. And I know young people don't do mad things like that unless they have a good reason. And so it's just, you have to listen to them, then you'll know they're right. And so in that sense, they kept wishing it away, explaining, until I was invited by Palestinian friends to participate in the journey towards writing the Palestinian Kairos, because I was part of the Kairos process in South Africa. So, and then all the things began to click. Now, I tell you that story because, in a sense, let me complete it. I went back to South Africa and confronted my Jewish friend and said, why did you put me into a program like that? And one of the things, by the way, we did was an environmental project of planting trees in a forest somewhere in what is now Israel. It's a forest that was presented as a green environmental project where, you know, the idea is to plant trees everywhere because the Arabs didn't plant trees. And so on my second visit, I go to the same place where I planted this tree, because that was ceremonial planting trees in this. I was with the South African delegation, mainly Jewish people. And so I meet a Palestinian who used to live in this forest. It's called the South Africa Forest, sponsored by South African Jewry. And he tells me, you see this forest here? It's in Israel. He shows me where his home was in this forest. He shows me where the animals used to drink. He shows me where the mosque used to be. And he shows me the boundaries of the household, the carcass. I think there's a little plant that was used in those days before 1948 to draw up to the borders of households. And he shows me all of this. And you can imagine the fury building up in my own heart as I thought, so what I was doing was to actually plant a tree to erase the memory of a village that was destroyed before 1948 and present it as a green project. And so I learned then that it was not the only village that was erased in that way. It was one of hundreds of villages that had the same fate, that were now green projects, and where some Jews from other parts of the world were sponsoring trees to erase the memory of people who used to live there. That propaganda that was used by the state, in a sense, was also in South Africa a similar propaganda where the darkest atrocities perpetrated by apartheid South Africa were covered up in such language, in such terms, as to conceal the hideous ways in which apartheid dealt with us. And unfortunately, there were many around the world who believed the narrative of white South Africa. Now, I say this to say that to the degree that there was a dominant theology in South Africa that took as its departure point the reality that you have this separation of people that was separate for their own good, to develop them in their own way as they each prefer. Beneath that was horror. And so what was out the reality, in fact, beyond the rhetoric, beyond the cover-ups, was that apartheid was being built to last. It was built to perpetuate itself. And you can't believe how successful that project was. And as I look at the struggle here, I'm hoping that it will be possible to undercut some of the long-term effects of what Israel is sowing into the fertile soil of this land by way of hatred, by way of underdeveloping people deliberately. In South Africa's terms, the apartheid was entrenched in every section of life, every part of our lives, from where we were born to where we go to school, where we are buried. Everything from the womb to the grave was determined by apartheid. The education system was so skewed, and I was telling young people yesterday that when I was growing up, I wanted to be an engineer because I thought I'm living in Africa, and therefore, you want to develop the place and become part of a solution. I found out when I finished high school that I couldn't. You can't be both black and an engineer at the same time, because that was saved only for white people. By the time 1994 came, South Africa the illiteracy rate was what? About 60%, which means 30 years later, this is 30 years after the 1994, people ask often, how do you transform this society? How is it that the opportunities that are now available for all to access were policy, from the policy standpoint, from the constitution standpoint, everything has been transformed to make it possible for everyone to participate. But the problem is that you can't if you have not got an education to enable you to do that. If you were 30 years old by 1994, hardly literate, you had a job in the mining industry that was created in a way that didn't need educated people. Even when they say education is now free, or all through high school, you can go to school, but nobody wants to go to school when you're 30. So 30 years later, you are what, 60? You still can't read or write. And even if you did, because government did try to get some literacy program, fast track that, even with the best effort, the majority of the people still are in the long job queues where you queue up with graduates even who have now come up, they are younger, they would like to participate, but they are also unemployed. And so it just perpetuates the inequality. So apartheid in that sense was built to last it was with a long-range view of creating a black underclass that forever serves white interests. The role played by religion in that, as is indeed the case here, is obvious. you need a theological legitimation for the programs, for the program that you have in place. You need a strong military. South Africa was a regional power in Africa. In fact, it still is to this day. You needed a powerful army to preserve white interest in a continent that is black. And so when you think about Israel being similarly a regional superpower here, you understand that to maintain oppression, you need a very strong army, and you need an economics that guarantees that. You need a cultural expression of that oppression that makes sure that this continues for as long as it takes. The churches responded to that in different ways, and I realize I'm running out of time, so I will just... the best way to understand what churches did with themselves over that period is best told in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. All churches, and I look at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission as our national altar call, an opportunity offered to all South Africans to say exactly what it was they did and why. The promise was, if you tell us the truth, you will be forgiven. There will be amnesty given you. Whatever atrocities you committed, you don't even have to be remorseful about it. All you have to say is, what did you do? Where are the people you killed secretly, who disappeared, who you buried in unmarked graves elsewhere? So people could find closure. So you had an opportunity to tell us what you did. And that's the hope was that this truth-telling that did not have the luxury to require remorse, because otherwise, where would you get remorse? People were not remorseful. If they had another opportunity, they'll do it again. And so a lot happened with regard to that for the victims, and I worked very much with the victims of human rights. We were very unhappy with this, obviously. I remember joining a group of church leaders, going to the president. At that time, it was President Thabo Mbeki, and he was trying to justify this arrangement where there was, if people tell the truth, no remorse, they are given amnesty, and they are victims, they get reparations. But you can imagine, this reparation, we're a third world country pretty much. So how is reparations going to look like? You've lost a leg, or your eyes, you are blind because some bullet went into your head, or you lost your parents. What reparation is fair? And so, particularly if the other side just gets amnesty, there's not even a requirement to pay back what they took. And so the president answers this question this way. He says two things. One is that this is a democratic government that you are asking to pay for the atrocities of the previous one, that all of us put our lives in line to dismantle. And now we have the serious task now to rebuild this society. We don't have extra cash. We've got to pull ourselves by our bootstraps. And I was thinking to myself as I listened to him that, so you are sitting in the president's chair, and you can say this, because you are the president. What more do you want? I have a friend who is blind or in a wheelchair who can't participate in this freedom. But that became the reality of our story. That in that process, the churches also came forward, because there were churches that churches were given the opportunity to explain themselves. Why did you do the things that you did? Why did you support apartheid? What was your rationale? And what will you do differently going forward? And so it was with because apartheid affected the legal, the medical, police. Doctors were collaborating with the police. They were required to do that, to report on people who were running away from the police, injured, and were in hospital. So there were all sorts of collaborationist arrangements that our society had. But what's interesting with the confessions of the churches, which goes back to the practice of churches, but also the theology by which they did it, all of them from the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church in South Africa is one of those very progressive churches that have come up always with the most progressive prophetic denunciation of the human rights that were going on. But it's one thing when this comes from the top of the church leaders and it doesn't affect the life of the Christian community. And so on the chair of the TRC was a man called Desmond Tutu. The cardinal of the Catholic Church comes there and he says, Arch, you know, as Catholics, we have harmed this country. I don't know if you know the name of Chris Hani. Chris Hani was the second most popular leader, liberation leader, next to Nelson Mandela. Before 1994, he was shot and killed, assassinated, just as we were heading towards the elections. In fact, we were still negotiating these elections. And the Catholic cardinal says, do you know who killed Chris Hani? It is a Catholic. And you know Chris Hani is a Catholic. So both of them, both the assassin and Chris Hani, were Catholics. So we are a mixed bag. And I suppose that's the story of the church. And so story after story, the Anglican Church came forward. On the chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is a Bishop Tutu, a man who was persecuted by the Anglican Church. They demonized him, Anglican bishops, white Anglican bishops who opposed him at every turn. They were now confessing and saying, Arch, there's no need to lie. You know what we did to you. We demonized you. We called you all sorts of names. We attacked your witness. We're sorry. We betrayed the people of this country. We betrayed Jesus Christ. We betrayed the gospel. We hope you can forgive us. And on, Pentecostals, charismatics, evangelicals. I had the good or bad fortune of reading the confession of the evangelical community. And it was the same. I come out of a tradition, evangelicals are notoriously conservative. And so I had to go back and tell them, what is it about evangelical theology that so personalizes our relationship with God that it becomes a useful tool for anyone who wants to use it as a tool to oppress. And so that confession is there in the public record. You can read the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of all of our traditions. I say all of that to say that And I'll close with this text because I think I've done damage to the time. That what has been very clear in the story of how churches responded and participated or collaborated with apartheid is often the way they sided with power and tried to ensure their survival by being part of the power arrangements of society, was seduced by power. And so this text where Jesus talks about, and we can think about the Lord Jesus as one, he came to this, he was born here, you know him better, so. Became the most powerful human being. And he was, to tell you the truth, he was God, disguised. But he just set aside every power, every glory, everything. Became a man born here, born the time that he was born. Always wondered why he wasn't born when there are cars or could drive. So he walked the length and breadth of this on foot. Became an absolute servant, responded to even the poorest, blind people who called him, asking him to heal. He would stop the whole entourage, just attend to that man. Was obedient unto death, laying aside all of his glory to participate in what it means to love others. And I think it was beautifully portrayed in the devotion in the morning about how he lives in us and hopes we will agree to go where he went. And so that's the only way we can escape the trappings, the capture of the church, in order that the witness of Jesus Christ may be fully unleashed in our cultures, in our generation. Whether you are in Europe, the Americas, Palestine, Africa, our task is to figure out how to disconnect from temporal, secular power, whether it's economic, political, social, whatever power it is, to just serve the cause of Christ. Thank you.